Hi, everybody. I was kind of letting people wander in the last minute or two here after 2 o'clock. Thanks for joining us after lunch and this afternoon. We're happy to have you. My name is Bonnie Gruber. I will be both moderating and speaking at today's presentation this afternoon. And we will be talking all about market research and in particular a concept called contextual inquiry. A little bit about me. I've been in, if you can hear me, let me talk right into this. Oh, that's right in your face. I have been in scholarly publishing for about 15 years, and over that time, I have developed pretty much a laser focus on customers, understanding what they do, how they were using the research that we are publishing, why they were using it, how it fit into their workflow. And over time, when you go from focus groups and interviews and then actually watching people, you realize a lot of what you heard from them wasn't exactly what they were doing. And so we came closer and closer to saying, how do you really see what they do? How do you understand their motivations and intents about what makes sense to them in their workflow and how the ecosystem of lots of tools fit in together? So that was our motivation actually for us to talk to you today about a process that we use. I have two terrific panelists with me today. I have Kate Lawrence, she's from EBSCO, and she'll tell you lots of great stories. And I have Chris Burkhart from Thomson Reuters, and he'll share the same. So we will share our time this afternoon and take all your questions, hopefully, at the end. So as I say, do as I do, not as I say. I'll step back for a minute and just talk a little bit about the product development life cycle so we actually can put into context a little bit about contextual inquiry or user observation, where it fits in, why it fits in, and how we look at that world of innovation and development and portfolio management and where different tactics also play into the role. So while we're here talking about contextual inquiry, there actually are lots of amazing tactics that play out over the course of the development life cycle, and we try to mix and match and create a set of tactics that both give you the insight that you need at the different points in time. When we talk about contextual inquiry, we're usually talking a little more in that innovation stage or upfront. It's very broad-based. We're trying to capture trends that we may not have understood through a survey or through even interviews or a focus group. And looking at that broad set of tools, what we came up with essentially were 3 different levels of tactics that you could use. So we call them level 1 and level 2 and level 3. And all of them are important, and they all play a certain role based on where you are in that product life cycle and the information that you want to capture. So when you know exactly what you're after, sometimes a survey is a great tool to get that information, and you're not going to spend the effort and the time to dive into something like contextual inquiry. But when you don't know exactly what you're looking for and your scope is very broad and you're in a new development phase, we move down into the levels where you get closer and closer to your customers to really see how they're using information, why they're using information, and how that can impact your product development life cycle, both in enhancements in a big way and as well as brand new products in the market. So that's our focus here as we look at contextual inquiry. So, now, contextual inquiry is an interesting thing. I've spent a lot of time using it, learning about it, understanding where it came from, why it's so effective in the first place. It does have its roots in anthropology and how social scientists would observe different cultures and different people, and then they really get to understand the motivations and how those ecosystems of different layers of people work together and what motivates them and what to make of all of that in that process of anthropology. And so what has happened over time is more and more companies have learned that they could adopt some of those same tactics. And what we've seen, particularly in consumer product companies, is that they have spent enormous amounts of time understanding their customers and understanding us as consumers, and whether it was Kimberly Clark and Huggies and diapers, or there's been a great story recently about Legos and how they transformed themselves and how kids were playing with toys and like the tactical interaction with little things as much as they liked watching video games, or even more so, they realized how to remake themselves. And so all of these these companies have incorporated anthropologists, the concept of ethnographic research, the concepts of user observation to see not only how their product works in the life cycle and in the process of their users, but they're also looking at all of the products. So they see that whole world of how different things come together. And that's what really makes this very different, is in the past we would spend a lot of time saying, here's our website, here's our products, let me put it in front of you, let me show me how you use it. And what you miss was all the interaction of all their tools, whether it was their email, whether it was other workflow tools or ways in which they are capturing information, and how it all played together, and then where things broke down in the process. And without seeing everything come together, it was really hard to be able to be very innovative with your own products. And so that's what contextual inquiry is. It's capturing the user data, how your customers naturally interact with all of those systems, their processes, their tools, and you do it right in their natural habitat, as we say. We don't meet with them in conference rooms, we don't meet with them in Starbucks, we don't meet with them over the phone, we go right into their offices, at their laptops, at their computers, we make them show us their mobile devices, I won't hand them anything differently than what they already have, and we spend time with them in their natural habitat. I always talk about channeling Jane Goodall in that process of just watch them, watch what they do, and take that all in. And as we play of where it's best, or how contextual inquiry works well, or where it works best, as I said earlier, it's great for new products, new systems, product concepts. It's great when you don't actually know what you're going to invent. You know there's probably a need out there, you have all this content, you have these other workflow tools, you have a website, but you have a gut feeling that as there's a change in technology and as there's a change in new competitive products, that there's ways in which people could be working with content more effectively, more efficiently, but you don't know how. And this is a great way to come in and observe them and look at new systems and product concepts, website designs, features, usability analysis. But I do often push back and say that contextual inquiry is not for everything. It's not for small efforts. It's not for starting a new book or even necessarily a new journal. There are other tactics that can get you that information. So this isn't the end-all, be-all tactic, but it does serve a really important purpose when your research goals and your scope is very broad. So what I'm going to do is just kind of walk you through the process, and then Kate and Chris are going to show you how it came to life for them in their world and in their product sets. And so I'll walk through these a little bit, and then I'm going to pass it over to them, but at least give you an overview of how the process works, how long it takes, and the number of people involved. So as I said, go through these. So the starter is, as you kick off the project, is really understanding who you want to talk to and the scope of your research goals. What activities do you hope and expect to support? So you do have to have some boundaries to some extent of what you want to observe in this process. And you want to see how they fit into the customer's workday and how different tools may possibly impact what they do. You can talk to lots and lots of people, but you don't have to. So what we have found over years and years of doing this is once you hit about 4 people in a specific customer segment, so you would segment, you'd build personas, and once you're in that segment, by the time you hit about 4, maybe 5 people at the most, you see a lot of repetition in the process. So what's fascinating, and it happens every single time, is the first person, everything's new. The second person, little bits new, some's the same. By the third person, you're like, oh, I've seen that now. And the fourth person, you're like, I've seen almost every single thing that they're doing. And it's a fascinating process that by the time you hit 5 people, in a segment, so I just want to be careful, in a segment, you will see repetitive processes and repetitive usage and repetitive tools. So what that means is you actually don't have to go out to that many people. Now, if you were talking about researchers and authors and readers, there might be 5 or so in each segment. But in the end, it's actually not this overwhelming process of the number of people that you have to talk to get really great data. The second part of the process is actually doing the contextual interviews and gathering all the data. Typically, you want to send a few people 2 to 3 people, and then you scribble a million notes, and you don't even know if it matters. You literally just write down every single thing that they do, and you feel like you'll make sense of it later. And like I said, you always do it in their workspace, and people will always say, oh, I have a conference room for you, and you never accept that. You always go right to where they work, as messy as it is, as noisy as it is. Even if they don't have a great workstation and you're talking with physicians on the floor, you want to go to the workstations that they use or a representative one that they use, so you actually see what the tools are that are in front of them and the chaos that's around them when they're actually looking up information. Not everyone's always on a medical floor. You could be with physicists, you could be with all kinds of different kinds of scientists, and there's also noisy labs and there's noisy places that they work, but it's important to see all the resources in that world that they work in, because it provides context in how they are answering questions, how they're looking things up, the network of devices, the network of computers that they may have across the lab, and to understand how those different components fit together. Still, however, you do want to keep them at ease. You can set up the scenario for them, and then you let them work. It's a funny little thing when you get started, because they don't always know, what do I show you, and you have to just lay it out for them. You know, what did you do today? Show me how you looked for content, or show me how you answered a question, and you kind of set the stage for them. And then they kind of jump right into it, and I have to say that people get very talkative. And what you want to do in this kind of observation, so it's not 100% like a Jane Goodall observation, because you do want to ask them what they're doing. Sometimes it's hard to follow. Sometimes you just want to say, why did you make that decision? Why did you choose that website? What were you looking for when you went there? And so you want them to kind of talk you through the process, almost teach you what they're doing, as if they were educating you on the decisions they were making and the content that they were looking for. And that's just to put everything in an understanding of what is happening in that moment, and making sure, however, that what they show you is what they actually do, that they're not putting on a show. I just did one literally last week where the person went to a particular website because it came up in conversation. I said, can you show me? And so he goes to that website, and then he looks at me, he said, oh, but I never do this. I said, well, if you never do that, then don't do that. Don't make that up here. How do you usually get to that website? And what he did was show me this convoluted process of going into email and searching something and having his search process and finding email from someone. He clicks on that link, and that's 100% of the ways that he accesses that website. And that's just so important for us to know, because that kind of person is never going to that home page. They're clicking through in links, and so understanding what information you're delivering and how it's getting to them and how they're getting to your content is not as simple as it may have seemed. And so that's just a great example of just trying to make sure that they show you what they actually do, and then you make them show you so they can tell you and talk to you, but as I say, do what they do, not what they say, and then you bring them back to the sites and you say, show me, and when was the last time you did that? And there are often times when they say they do this all the time, and you say, show me, you go to the site, and they need to change their user ID and password, or their password, because they haven't been on the site in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and so do they really go there all the time? You know, they go there sometimes. They weren't lying to you, but they lose track of time, and they don't actually use some sites as often as they think they do. And so that's why often when you just have an interview or you have a focus group, people sort of create a world of what they think they do that's better than what they actually do. And so that's why it becomes so important to watch them in action versus just taking their word for it. But what's equally important after you actually do the data capture and you watch them and you take your 20 pages of notes is you sit down with your wider team, the couple people who actually went to the interview and then people who didn't go with the interview, and you just talk it through, every step of what you saw, why it mattered. Everybody gets to talk about it. There are different people who may have gone to other interviews, and everybody brings that together, and you talk through, you make lots and lots of notes that ultimately go on these little post-it notes in the next phase. But it's a really interactive discussion with everybody, and it's educating, your wider people in your organization. And so then it takes you to the affinity diagram, which is step 4. And you have all of those notes that you manage to somehow get printed on Post-it notes, and then you start making sense of it. And essentially what you do is you deconstruct every single interview that you went on. And if you did 10, if you did 12, if you did 18, I once did 35, you break them all down into individual little notes, you mix them all up, and in that deconstruction and then reconstruction process, you start to group different themes that you didn't see that become surprisingly consistent across a lot of people in a way that nobody could have really individually pulled out if you had only done one interview or if you had only done one focus group. It's fascinating what grows out of immersing yourself in the data, and then always not even looking at the quote that they said, but understanding what exactly were they really trying to achieve, because sometimes what they tell you isn't the true motivation of what they were trying to achieve, and then when you get all of that together from lots of different people, a light bulb goes off, and you understand here's what was important to this group of users, and here's really why, they were setting up a profile, for example. And this world of affinity diagramming that we do is a Six Sigma process. I took lots of pictures, actually, some of them mine, but I took other pictures of how other people do it across the internet. And you search on affinity diagrams, you'll see 1,000 different examples of it, but it's a great process for aggregating lots and lots of data. Here's some additional pictures of my own. Actually, these are yours, Kate.
Yep.
You're welcome. And just to show you how the process, even in building an affinity, starts kind of crazy, and you just get everything up on the walls. You just try to put it into categories, and over about 2 to 3 days, ideas come together and they converge, and ultimately you end up with something that you can really work with, and that makes a lot of sense. And then from there, you bring in even more people than your creators of your affinity to then make sense of it all, and what trends and concepts and work breakdowns you actually see across those walls of information. And the whole process of envisioning solution is what can you build to fix them? What's not on the market? What do people not have available to them, and how they use their ecosystem of content sets that they have today and tools. So over the next hour or so, Kate and Chris will give you some much more specific examples. Let me introduce both of them, and then we'll save all questions for the end and go from there. So Kate
Thank you, Mom.
is our Director of User Research at EBSCO.
Yes.